Hello and welcome, everyone. If you are seeing Create and Share NHD-related content with the Smithsonian Learning Lab, then you are in the right place. Today we have a great webinar planned for you. Here we'll share some examples of ways that cultural organizations from across the country have used the Smithsonian Learning Lab to provide resources for students as they start on their research journeys throughout the school year. In preparation for National History Day. Today, I am joined by a wonderful panel. We have myself, Ashley Naranjo from the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access here. I'm also joined by Amanda Wallach from the National History Day organization, and she's going to share a little bit about what the competition entails, what types of projects students are working on, and also some suggested topic areas based on this year's theme of triumph and tragedy. We also have Tess Porter. She's also from the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access, and our office manages the Smithsonian Learning Lab and looks for ways to use it to help students practice research skills, but also provide resources for teachers as well. And so this is just one of many ways you could use the Learning Lab in your own classrooms. And finally, we have Joe Phelan. He's a guest from Edcitement, which is a fabulous resource for teachers as well. It's a digital website that includes tons of resources for learning around a variety of topics within the humanities. So very lucky to have these folks with us today. As we get started, I wanted to thank all the Smithsonian affiliate museums that are joining us, the Smithsonian Institution traveling exhibition venues, and DC cultural organizations from across the mall and beyond. I wanted to mention too that this session is specifically targeted to content creators. So if you stumbled upon this session, whether it's in the archived version or in the live version, please feel free to stay with us and join us. But just a specific note that this is mainly a session to help content creators share their content digitally for National History Day students and think about how they might use the Learning Lab to help curate those resources for students in a way that makes sense based on the topics. Like I mentioned, the session will be archived both via YouTube immediately after the session. So if you find out, you find something good in this session and you want to share it with a colleague, or if you want to go back and refer to some of the websites that we've mentioned, you can. It'll also become searchable within the Smithsonian Learning Lab at learninglab.si.edu, and that's the platform that we'll be talking about today. Please feel free to ask questions of our presenters or share ideas that you have in the comment box to the right of the YouTube viewer. Right now you'll see it says Smithsonian Education. Welcome everyone, so you can respond right under that. I'd love to know who's with us today too, so if you'd like to chime in the chat box, please feel free to do so. So today what we're going to do, we're going to give you an overview of National History Day. We're going to share a unique collaboration between the Smithsonian and Edcitement that's been going on for the past 3 National History Days, so we're very excited to have Joe and Tess join us for that. We'll also show some example collections of resources that model both skills that students might need to complete their National History Day projects, as well as some content. We'll give you a brief introduction of the Smithsonian Learning Lab, and then we'll share how we plan to offer outreach for these projects that you create, these collections that you create over the course of this upcoming year. Students are starting to research their projects this fall, and so we'd love to have those available for students as soon as possible. So with that, I'd like to introduce Amanda Wallach, who is from the National History Day organization, and she's going to give us a brief overview of what the competition is, what the organization does, and the theme for this year. Amanda?
Great, thank you. All right, so if we could get the slide up on the screen. Awesome. So National History Day is an independent nonprofit organization. We're working to improve history education in classrooms around the world. We have programs going on in all 50 states, as well as the territories, Washington, D.C., and as well as a few Asian affiliates mixed in there too. So we really are a worldwide organization, which makes for a really interesting competition. We do this through a lot of different ways. Some of them are the online graduate courses we offer for teachers. We have a myriad of teacher professional development, including trips that we take to do place-based learning. But the biggest thing that we do is the national contest. And if you are interested, that URL down there will lead you to a quick video that gives you a nice overview of what the contest is. But for our national contest, students, it's kind of like a science fair, but for history. So students spend the year researching a topic of their choosing that they work on either in the classroom or as an extracurricular. And it's all based around a theme. And they create exhibits, they create documentaries, websites, performances, or they write papers. So it offers students a way to learn and engage with history in a format that works for them and for their learning styles. So that link at the top there will lead you to some of our project examples, and that can give you a feel for what these students are creating each year at the contest. So like I mentioned, the contest is based around a theme. So this year's theme, as Ashley mentioned, is triumph and tragedy in history. So these themes are intentionally broad. We want to make them work for classrooms around the world at different levels. We don't want to limit students in their ability to choose a topic that they feel passionate about. So triumph and tragedy is broad enough to work for world history topics, ancient topics, local topics, US topics, doesn't matter. We want it to stay that broad feel for it. Triumph and tragedy specifically, we want students to really see every side to the story. So what one person's triumph is often another person's tragedy, and we can't ignore one side or the other when it comes to history, and that's where that "and" comes into play. So if you happen to be working with students throughout this contest season, encouraging them to really look at all sides of the story and maybe look at a piece that they weren't as familiar with is really helpful and allows the students to get a much more holistic view of whatever topic that they are diving into. At that nhd.org/theme link, that gives more information about the theme, including our theme book, which is available for downloading as a PDF on that link. That includes our theme narrative and topics list, which goes into more detail about the theme itself and has broken down topics list based on US history, world history, and European history. So that's a good place to go as well. Topics can range from all different areas. So I picked out a few from the topics list to fit into these categories to just show you how wide of a breadth you can go. We certainly encourage students to learn and investigate about things that they are passionate about. So if they really love art, then you can definitely tie a history topic into art or into science or medicine or into military history, whatever avenue that they want to go down. As long as they tie it back to the theme, then we are okay with that. What's really great is when students are able to tie a local history topic to a national one. So this is where some of our local museums, local historical societies can be really helpful to students, because if a student is interested in the civil rights movement and the local history museum knows of a particular civil rights event that took place in that town and they have collections on it, that's a really great way for a student to get hands-on experience about something that is local, and then being able to tie that local topic to the national civil rights movement creates a really strong project. We love it when students are really getting their hands on those primary sources. So especially when we're getting more creative with our primary sources and thinking about how art and portraiture or artifacts can also be primary sources that students can use, especially for our more visual categories such as exhibits or documentaries. It's a way for those projects to really stand out, to use different and inventive primary sources that can come from your collections. And it's a great way for you all to really reach out into the classroom and get your amazing materials out and into the hands of the students and the teachers.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. I just wanted to mention, too, we have a note from one of our viewers who's actually from the Ford Theater, so not too far from where we're located in at the Smithsonian. And he mentioned clearly they have lots of primary sources that fit very well with this theme. So I think that'll be really exciting to see what they create. And then I love that you've kind of broken it down for us here in terms of art, science, history. There's plenty of different ways disciplines can, different disciplines can kind of weave into these student projects and kind of have a hook based on student passion. So I love that. And I think that's something that affiliates and especially our traveling exhibition venues, as they're thinking about their primary sources and how they fit into this theme, I think that kind of theme book and the topics that are included will be really helpful to start kind of brainstorming how they might support students' research projects. So I love that. Excellent. Thank you so much. I wanted to go now to Tess and Joe, and they're going to share a little bit about what they've done in the past with Learning Lab collections. They've been doing Learning Lab collections now for just about 3 years, actually. And so this year's theme, Triumph and Tragedy, they're already well ahead of the game and have some collections ready for students. But wanted to kind of get their expertise into this session, too, of what they've created and how they've kind of structured their collection. So Tess and Joe?
Thank you, Ash. So this year, the Smithsonian Learning Lab was featured in the theme book for Triumph and Tragedy in History. The article focuses on the Learning Lab as a tool for research and covers some examples of collections that educators have created, including Joe and myself. But at the very end, there is a short link that leads to all collections in the Smithsonian Learning Lab tagged with the hashtag NHD. So after today, if you create a collection on the Learning Lab using that hashtag, and Ashley will talk more later about how that's done, students and teachers who read this article and are looking for resources on the Learning Lab related to National History Day will discover the collections that you create. So yeah, like Ashley said, today we wanted to share a few ways that educators have used the Learning Lab to pull together resources. That's the short link there that's included in the article. And the first one we wanted to talk about was one that Joe and myself created. But before we dove into that, Joe, do you want to share a little bit about what incitement is?
Sure. Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Joe Phelan, and I've for 15 years I've worked at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and for 11 of those years I've been in incitement. And so, what is it? It's a 500, at least 500 lesson plans, over 400 vetted websites, and many additional materials, student-centered materials that we've developed over the years. And among the advantages of using incitement is that you tap into the great resources that the National Endowment for the Humanities has funded over the years. We're a funding agency, and so many of the projects that that may be of interest to students as a research location are things that the agency funded. So, for instance, the project that we're going to talk about on World War I is something that was funded by the agency, and that you can find through searching on, well, either looking at the the material that Tess was talking about, or by going to Incitement and typing in World War I. And the thing about war and triumphs is very fascinating when you think about it. The first triumphs were military parades that the ancient Romans gave to their victorious generals. And within those triumphs, there were the captives and the slaves that they had the armies had conquered. And so there was a tragedy within the triumph. And in fact, many of the Roman generals, that was the high point of their career. After that, they went downhill. So there's a lot to think about with the idea of triumph and tragedy. And I think especially when it comes to war, one gets a lot of ideas by thinking or examining a particular war or series of wars. So, Tess, are we gonna move to World War I?
Yeah, so this is one of the collections that Joe and I created for the Triumph and Tragedy theme this year. The 3 years we've been doing this, we've decided to focus on kind of big topics in history and then dive into them and sharing resources on kind of different subtopics, perspectives, or events that students may not have considered or didn't know about before. So this is an example of what a Learning Lab collection looks like. Each icon is a resource. If I were to click on any of these, I can view them more in depth. So in putting this together, Incitement has a wonderful wealth of secondary resources like lesson plans and articles and blog posts, alongside wonderful documentaries and other websites that compile kind of primary resources and contextual information together. And the Smithsonian has a great wealth of primary sources, like not only documents, but photographs and articles. So we thought tying those two together could work really well. So we've included both here. Because World War I is such a huge topic, we've divided this into subsections. So focusing on, smaller ideas like Woodrow Wilson and his foreign policy, the experiences of African Americans both during and after the war, kind of artworks created by soldiers and hired artists of their experiences during the war, kind of the physical costs of war and the medical innovations that came out of trying to deal with that, and more. So, Joe, do you want to talk about one of the National Endowment for the Humanities resources here, World War I in America?
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm very enthusiastic about this site, World War I in America. It was developed by the Library of America, which is a very prestigious publication that honors America's great writers and thinkers. And so the agency gave a grant to them to do something around World War I and America. And the result is this website, which it contains a lot of resources. It contains a free ebook with some amazing primary sources by people such as the president, Woodrow Wilson, the women who fought, the women who supported the war, the women who were opposed to the war, the African Americans who fought in the war, the African Americans who were opposed to the war, and the great writers like Ernest Hemingway and Robert Frost, who wrote works of literature about the war. So there's a lot here. As you can see, Race and World War I, American Women at War, The Home Front, America on the World Stage, Coming Home, and the PDF reader is at the bottom. It also includes short videos by scholars, speaking really directly to pretty much a high school audience, telling you why these themes are important. So you have Jennifer Keene, who's a military historian, writing about the idea of wartime service by American women. And there are the readings. So you have two stories by Mary Borden, and you have a diary entry by Shirley Millard, and then you have Willa Cather, again, another great American writer. So this is stuff that you may not know about. This is stuff that doesn't turn up in a Google search. So it's really worth going here and exploring what's there and thinking about the themes of triumph and tragedy.
Thank you, Joe. So that's just one example of the kind of the types of National Endowment for the Humanities resources that we pulled in here for students and teachers. I wanted to show you one example of a Smithsonian resource. So in this collection, if I click on this tile, I can view this resource in depth. I can use tools in the bottom to zoom in and out. So when you create collections and upload your own resources to the lab, teachers and students will be able to do that as well. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, information about the resource is located underneath the Information tab here. So if I were to click on that, for this Smithsonian resource, it includes information like when this photograph was taken, where it was taken, and this one also includes information too that explains, you know, the context of what's going on in this photograph, that this is a pyramid of captured German helmets that was displayed by Grand Central Terminal in New York City in about 1918. So if you create your own collections and upload your own resources into the site, you can customize the information that'll appear here for teachers and students. And two, you can attach information to it. Ashley will show some really cool ways that educators have done this in other collections. When I created this collection with Joe, I chose to put kind of the most important contextual information here. So to go back out, I'm going to click on this grid button in the lower right. So aside from kind of primary and secondary resources, the second year that Joe and I worked on this project, we realized that it might be helpful for students if we included some questions that'll help them analyze and use primary sources that they may be less familiar with as more than just illustrations in their projects. So like photographs and objects and artworks. So in our collections, the second resource in each of them looks like this: questions to help with resource analysis. This is a tile that I created in Photoshop and uploaded to the site, though you can easily do it in Paint or PowerPoint or any other graphic program. So if I click here, and here I click on the paperclip to see what's attached to it, this is where I've attached some questions that help, for example, with, all right, what questions can you ask when looking at an artwork that'll help you understand what story it tells about this moment in history? So yeah, this is just one example of kind of how Joe and I thought about putting this together. And Ashley, I think you wanted to share one by the American Art Museum.
Absolutely. Thanks so much to Joe and Tess for walking us through those collections specifically. In the chat too, as you're listening to ideas of ways that you could use the Learning Lab, I would love to hear what you're brainstorming right now as far as connections to your organization's mission, theme, the primary sources that you have access to, and the ways that that might connect to triumph and tragedy. I'm going to show two examples too that are a little bit different than Joe's and Tess's, that demonstrate what it would look like to kind of focus specifically on a strategy rather than a specific type of primary or a specific primary source. And then the second one will also show how a local affiliate museum in Pittsburgh took on the theme of conflict and compromise last year too. But so like I said, if you have any ideas that you're starting to kind of brainstorm, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. So taking a peek at this collection here, this was done by a Smithsonian American Art Museum a museum educator named Phoebe Hilleman. And what I really love about this collection is she basically helps students start to think of American artworks specifically as a historical source. So what are those really good questions that you can kind of get nitty-gritty with an artwork to start to kind of glean information from them and make sense of them? And so in the first tile, she really introduces just what are some of those kind of key questions around content, composition, and even context that you might have about a specific artwork. So she gives kind of some of those examples. And then in the next slide, she points out specific details in her reading of this artwork. And so as she's modeling this for students, she's also providing some opportunities for them to start to notice these things as well. And then in the upcoming slide, right after that, she provides several different examples of other artworks that the students could use. And this is one example where she's taken a specific artwork, a sculpture, and she's used the tools of the Learning Lab to add a bit of interactivity. So for example, here, she's done a visible thinking routine. It's called See, Think, Wonder, and it's seemingly simple, but it's really a great line of inquiry for students to start to notice details, to start to kind of collect their observations, and then also start to make interpretations based on the details and the evidence that they have within the artwork. So here she's done, what do you see? What do you think it means? And what do you wonder? In the next interactive element that she's added, she's actually able to use hotspots from the Smithsonian Learning Lab to really zoom in. And so she can highlight a specific part of that artwork. And then when a student hovers over, they can see that kind of prompt or question that she's added to that hotspot. If you continue through, she's done a few different hotspots here. So she's focused on specific figures as well as their relationship to each other within this sculpture. And I think in the next one, she's done the same with the child in the basket. And then finally, she's added some info text as well to add context for students. So, you know, going beyond what we know for sure from the details that we see in the image to adding some of that historical context. So what's nice about this collection, if we kind of look at the entire collection as a whole, we can start to see she's really kind of highlighted some practice in reading and understanding context in artworks, and then also demonstrated how you might pair artworks with documents too. And then finally, towards the end, she includes several examples of artworks that really relate to the theme of conflict and compromise. So this is a good starting point, a good springboard for students, especially as they're in that kind of early fall process of honing in on what their topic might be. This is kind of a great way to say, hey, here's a medium that you might not have thought of before, and here's some ways to start to dig in deep and analyze these resources. So I really love this collection. You'll notice in this collection, she includes a title, she has her name, and then she's also tagged it with specific keywords so that it's easy for someone to find within the Learning Lab repository too. So again, this is really a great example from the American Art Museum. I wanted to pause for a second and read through some of the ideas that folks have. The first is, let's see, we have got, coming in all the way from across the mall, people's reactions to the Lincoln assassination. Also, the idea of kind of adding some more interactivity is especially interesting to some folks as they're thinking about how do you curate these resources in a way that's manageable for students as they're starting to do the research process. And then again, I think the interactivity is especially of interest to folks as they're starting to think about how do you present these resources to folks who are just getting started, and how do they dig in. And so being able to add depth, understanding, and relevancy to topics, events, people, and things that currently might seem somewhat unrelatable to folks. So keep adding some comments as you're going through and thinking about what this might look like in your own context. The next collection that I wanted to show is actually from a Smithsonian affiliate, the Heinz History Center. And this was based on last year's theme as well of conflict and compromise in history. But what I love about this is they took kind of this large theme of labor strikes, but really localized it to Pittsburgh specifically. What I always kind of say too is in the Smithsonian Learning Lab, there's access to over 3 million digitized resources from across the Smithsonian. That includes everything from artworks to specimen, blog posts to videos with curators. It includes diaries, it includes artifacts. But if that's not enough for students, and it shouldn't be, there's certainly a lot that you can actually upload from your own organization. So this is a great collection of both combining Smithsonian resources with the local resources too. So if we look, if we scroll down just a little bit, and so here we can see kind of a variety of things that this author from the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has included. She's included websites. She's also included photographs too. So in that bottom row, those are from our collections. Up in the, right above that photograph right there too, that's actually from the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania. So she's added in this homestead census. And then in the top left, if we go to the annotation, we can start to see more information and ideas for ways to use historical statistics too. So these resources kind of in combination with the Smithsonian resources are especially kind of an interesting way to localize history and to also help kids kind of see both the big picture, but then also kind of drill down to their own hometowns. And I know that's something that Amanda mentioned in her presentation too, that really part of National History Day is making those personal connections to your hometown, to your local history as well. And so that's, you know, one reason why we thought Smithsonian affiliate museums especially might be interested in kind of combining those resources together to help students through their research process. Looking again at some more comments, and this I love too, because this is actually from the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. So seemingly National History Day and a science-related research institute. But she says she's hoping to create a collection about black-footed ferrets, the near extinction, and how we're bringing them back. A nice kind of tie-in to the human development on the prairie, which was a huge triumph, but also had elements of tragedy too. And I love that Amanda's shaking her head too, because there's really a nice connection there that perhaps a student might be really interested in kind of thinking about wildlife. And so this is a connection that they could make throughout history to kind of tie in their own interests as well. So love to hear that from Kristen as well. So next, and again, if you have any questions throughout this entire session, please feel free to just add them to the chat. I know we've shared kind of a few different examples of what this could look like for you. And now we wanted to demonstrate what it would look like if you were to create your own collection in the Learning Lab. The Learning Lab itself has been around for just a little over 2 years. It's based on research with over you know, tons of, I think it was 5 years of research with almost 200 teachers that we've been working with, and really getting into kind of what are teachers looking for, how can they help their students using digital primary resources. So one of the things we wanted to show was how you might be able to search within our collections, how you might be able to create collections themselves, upload them, tag, and publish them. And so if you haven't visited our website recently, we just did kind of a homepage revamp. And so you'll see that it really goes through nicely some of those kind of main key verbs that you're able to do as you're going through the website. But so today what we're going to do, we're going to show you, like I said, how to search through over 3 million Smithsonian resources, how to create your own collection, upload your organization's resources, and then when you publish collections and you tag them with either both actually, hashtag NHD or specifically to this NHD 2019, they'll show up in searches. They'll show up in the theme book article that Tess mentioned earlier. And then we'll be able to share those out through a variety of different means. We're going to be doing a blog post, some social media throughout the month of September, a newsletter. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can share not only the resources that Tess and Joe have created, but also across the Smithsonian Learning Lab, trying to demonstrate to students that there's kind of a repository and a wealth of different topics that they can choose from too. So Tess, if you could pull up to the Learning Lab as I kind of go through these resources, we can give them a tour of the website. Like I mentioned, I wanted to say the Learning Lab has such a variety of different resources from across the Smithsonian: artworks, artifacts, specimens, texts. And when we say texts, we mean things like diaries and journals and documentation. But we also mean things like blog posts. And oftentimes blog posts kind of, they're written by museum educators and provide a great kind of foundation for students, some context and accessible language that they can really dig into. We have photographs, of course. And we have recordings, and that means both things like podcasts. The Smithsonian has a side door podcast that's especially engaging. Typically, there's about 30-minute interviews with Smithsonian experts from across the institution. But that also means things like recordings. I think there's close to 6,000 panda videos. So, try to stay on focused with the triumph and tragedy, but on Friday nights, looking at panda videos is awfully cute. So something to kind of keep in mind. And so here with Tess, she's going to show us kind of pointing out how we can do a search. This is the homepage of the Learning Lab. Like I said, learninglab.si.edu. And here in the top left, there is a magnifying glass. And here's where you can type in a search term. Often I start with something kind of big and then refine my search. So for example, if I were to start with the word immigration, let's say, so as I'm typing in immigration, the Learning Lab provides resource search results that are highly visual. So there are 3,820 resources with some relationship with the word immigration. And you can see that in that first tab there, the 3,820. And then there's also 75 Learning Lab collections that have been created already based on the topic or the keyword immigration. So that might be too much to go through for the first kind of iteration. So I might be able to refine my search, and you'll notice that there's a button underneath the search bar to be able to refine your search, and then you can update your search based on your refinements. For example, things like media types, so images, audio, video, text, learning resources. You can also see if things are currently on exhibit. And then finally, who the resource provider is. So let's say I want to see things specifically from the National Museum of American History. I could click on that, and specifically images, I checked that. I click update search, and that'll whittle down my search just a little bit more. For me, one of the most interesting search results here is the who you call an immigrant pilgrim. So we could click on that button. And here what's nice is, like I said, kind of the images is king as far as the search results go. So in the bottom right, I can zoom in and out to see greater detail. I can also see if there's multiple images. And so this is actually part of a larger series of buttons that were released from American history. In the top left of every image, I think Tess pointed this out earlier, but it's worth a second reiteration. If you click on the I button, you'll see the metadata or the museum information about that image. You'll see information about what its media is, its source, some keywords, the date it was made, its physical description, etc. And when we take this image, let's say this is an image we want to start to curate our own collection from, you can click on the plus button, and it'll ask you to log in for your first time. So something to note is that as you're searching through the Learning Lab, you won't need a user account. But it's only when you want to start customizing your experience. So things like being able to add to a collection, being able to bookmark or favorite your resources. So we'll go ahead and sign in if possible. And Tess, I can, oh, there you go, perfect. And so now, if you have a lot of collections like Tess does, you would see the full kind of spread of all of her collections that she's able to add these resources to. But we're going to create a new collection. So we're going to go to the second tab, and we can give it any name. Typically, it should be a descriptive name because the title and the description are searchable within the Learning Lab once you publish. So here she's naming it Triumph and Tragedy, Immigration. She's making sure to include those hashtags in the description so that when someone searches, they're findable. And then she'll click Create Collection. And so now it's added this resource to our collection. One thing I wanted to mention, I always kind of make the Beatles reference of following the sun. So all of your navigation happens in that top right button with the Smithsonian Sunburst. So if you click on the top right Smithsonian Sunburst, this is where you'll be able to see the home page, for example, where you'll be able to click into our blogs. You'll be able to see the profile, your favorites as you start to bookmark resources that are of interest. But the one that I wanted to go to today is the collections, to be able to see that collection we just created. Like I mentioned, Tess's may take a little while because she has lots of collections. She's been working on tons. So right now she has over 94 published collections that you can search through the Learning Lab, including ones on National History Day. But then she also has unpublished collections. And there's the collection we were just referring to. So if we click on that one, we can see she's got her title, she's got the description, and she's got that one resource that we included in the collection. So how do we add any of that interactivity that we were talking about earlier? So if we go to the Edit Collection button, it's that green button right there. You'll know you're in edit mode when you have the green band at the top of your collection. And then this is where we can start to customize the specific resource that we've included. As you click on the button, there's a paperclip, and that's kind of like attaching additional information, attaching additional annotations. If you click on it, it'll open up a menu where you can add things like info text, which could be a prompt or a vocabulary list, for example. You can also add things like quiz questions alongside it to check for understanding. And then you can also add image hotspots. So let's add an image hotspot. And here we have some options. We can actually add things like boxes, highlights, or targets to point out specific details on an image. So let's say I wanted to, there you go, perfect. You can start to kind of pick a specific part. We might want to ask students to really reflect on this kind of specific slogan, who you call an immigrant pilgrim, and start to think about meaning, start to think about what it might connect to as far as the themes that we're talking about. So when we click done, and we click save and exit, yes, I'm done. It's always good at double checking. Now when you click on the image, you'll see that one in the top left, and that is a note to you that there's an annotation there. And now when we hover over, we've got our slogan there. You can also click back into the grid and click Edit Collection. And now when you click Add Resource, you have options to add some of your favorites to this collection. You also have options in the middle to upload an additional resource. And so you're actually able to upload anything from a graphic organizer, a strategy that you might think is interesting to students. You can also upload, files like photographs, for example, and it'll ask you some citation questions too of who's the creator, where's the source URL, and then you can upload it. And those are the file types that are available, anything from JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, documents, etc. The other option, though, is you can actually contribute a website or URL. And these external resources that you're adding to your collections actually serve as resources that are added within the context of your specific collection. So let's say Tess wanted to add that World War I website from EdCitement. She can include the URL. She can include the title. It's okay if you don't have it exactly right, Tess. There you go. So she's able to add the resource via the URL to be able to, there we go. And then she'll click add. And so now she's got her resource that's first, and she's got the website. That website will generate a screen preview like you see now. And when she saves it, as students are coming to that tile within her collection, you can click on the collection, hover over the middle, and it'll say go to website. So it'll let students know, hey, you're leaving the Smithsonian Learning Lab, but it gives you a direct connection to those resources. So what's nice about that too is that we have kind of the ability to connect to other great authoritative resources from across the country, not only the Smithsonian's resources, and those are added within context of a Learning Lab collection. One other thing I wanted to show you, and I'll show you here, you can customize your profile so that you can have either an organization account or an individual's account. And you can do that by clicking on the sunburst in the top right, like I said, and then clicking on profile. And here's an example from a Smithsonian affiliate, the Songus Industrial History Center. They have several collections highlighting their Asian American community within Lowell, Massachusetts. And then we also have Phoebe's profile from the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which highlights some of the collections that she's created, including that how do you analyze an artwork as a text collection right there. So what we'd like to do is have folks, if you're interested in sharing your collections, we'll be doing a lot of publicity for these collections and would love to include your resources as well. So what we're hoping is that you'll publish your Smithsonian Learning Lab collection by Friday, September 7th. If you miss the deadline, you can always add the hashtags NHD and NHD 2019, and they'll still be searchable in all of our later resources as well. So this fall, as teachers and students are starting to kind of help with that research process, I wanted to let you know a few things that our office will be doing. We'll be posting these collections on social media, not only through Smithsonian EDU, but also through Smithsonian Lab. We'll author a blog post that will feature these collections during the week of September 17th. And so you can find the Smithsonian Learning Lab blog at the very bottom of the homepage, so you can see some examples. There was just a great post last week about a student-led project for first-generation college students getting acclimated to visual literacy through the Smithsonian Learning Lab. And then we'll also feature these collections within a Bright Ideas newsletter, which has over 35,000 opted-in recipients, users of the Learning Lab specifically, during that week of September 17th. I wanted to mention too, we often share great success stories from across the Smithsonian Learning Lab, so you can follow us on Twitter at Smithsonian Lab. Joe's EdCitement is at EdCitement, and you can share how you've used any of their resources as well. And finally, Amanda at National History Day just double checking, it's national history, is that right, with no space? Oh.
Sorry, I forgot I had to unmute myself. Yes.
No worries.
Yeah, at National History with no space.
Okay, perfect. And then finally, if at any point during this process of thinking about how your resources might connect to what the Smithsonian has, or if you have any trouble using the site or any great successes, we would love to hear about them. Our email is learninglab@si.edu. That includes myself and Tess, as well as a number of different educators, digital folks, and evaluation folks from across the Smithsonian that are all working on this project together. With that, I wanted to check in with our panelists. Are there any other things that you wanted to mention to folks that are viewing the webinar? Any good tips that you might have for newbies?
I had one thing. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the process of publishing your collection.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
So I'll go back to the collection Ashley and I created. So when you create a collection for the first time, it's automatically unpublished. That means it's only visible to you and those that you send the URL to. When you're ready to publish, once you've finished your description, have your resources and your hashtags to publish, you'll just click this blue publish button here. It'll ask you to make sure all of the data you want is there. And once it's published, it'll be available in search for others to discover. So because I have the hashtags here, NHD, when I search for NHD in the Learning Lab, it'll show up here with all the other National History Day collections. Once it's published, though, I can still make changes to it. If I spot a typo, if I find another resource I want to add, I can add those at any time. And then, two, if I decide I want to take it down for a little bit to republish at a later date, I can do that too.
Excellent. And that's something, too, that actually Tess and I have found as we're creating collections. Sometimes a great Smithsonian Magazine article pops up and we want to include it, or perhaps there's a new artifact that's just been digitized that we want to add to our collections. Tess, could you also take us to the homepage for a second? So she's clicking on the sunburst in the top right. That's another thing that's actually on every single page of the homepage of the website. And so she clicked on the sunburst and she clicked on home. And as we scroll down, as we scroll down, we'll see the kind of key elements of what you can do on the Learning Lab. Everything from searching and discovering. There's a few testimonials from folks that have used the Learning Lab. And then also some browse options. So if you're not sure what to start with as far as different topic areas, that's a place for you to be able to find images and then refine your search based on those. It also gives you some of the capabilities as far as what you can do within creating. So again, we mentioned things like uploading and annotations, but there's also the ability to copy someone else's collection and then remix it. So for example, if you really liked what Phoebe did with American artwork and you have artwork at your institution, you can make a copy and then start to edit it based on the artwork at your institution. What's nice is that it also trails back to the original author and gives them credit. So you don't have to worry about that. And that's a nice way for folks to see how people have kind of remixed their own content. As you scroll down to and create, we have some examples of ready-to-use models. So things like topical collections, which are often thematic. So for example, all the Civil War uniforms in one collection. We have things like teacher collections where it's often very similar to kind of the structure of a lesson plan where you're giving kind of those best laid sub-plans. So have the students do X, here's all the sheets that you might need, that sort of thing. And then there's also student activities where it's very directed towards the student. It could be a great opportunity for things like blended learning. And often they have quiz questions and things like that built in already for the student. But one of the things I really wanted to mention too was that National History Day is actually featured on the homepage. So as folks are looking for these great ready-to-use model collections, we have some that are specifically using visible thinking routines, historical thinking skills, design thinking, and then ta-da, with a Lincoln star right there, we've got the National History Day collections, and that's a way that you can access those collections that Tess just referred to. Currently, I think there's over 30 different collections from past themes, and even this year, there's collections both from Tess and Joe, who have created 2019 collections around triumph and tragedy, as well as from Brianna White, who's an educator at the National Portrait Gallery, and also has an article within the theme book that features the Learning Lab. So lots of ways to kind of stay connected with National History Day through the Smithsonian Learning Lab. Like I said, if you either shoot us a note or let us know by publishing your collection. We would love to feature your collections and the great primary sources that you and your organization have available for students. Any last words, Amanda, before we let our folks go?
I think you guys covered it all, but this was really great, and I'm so excited to see what you all come up with. I can't wait to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. The National History Day organization has also done a great job. Not only do they have the National History Day Twitter handle, but also different states also have networks as well. And they often retweet and share out these resources as they're finding them for students. I know, could you give us an idea of the timeline as far as how students throughout the school year kind of proceed through their process?
So it does vary classroom to classroom, but in general, most teachers will introduce the project pretty early in the fall to get students to think about what their topic might be, start that initial secondary research, primary research, and then the actual contest timeline, they start at the local level of contest, and that happens in late winter, early spring. So all of the research and project creation has to happen in the fall so that they're ready to compete by the time late winter, spring comes around. And then they continue to advance through the state contests and then eventually nationals, which is the second week of June here in Maryland.
Perfect, perfect. And I know too, you had mentioned there were some opportunities for folks that are listening in, whether they're in DC or otherwise. And I'll share that on the screen too. So here we have, if you're interested in being a judge, which everyone who I've ever known that's been a National History Day judge has just come back so psyched to the office and so inspired by all of the great work that students are doing. Here's the information to contact Kim at nhd.org. And then, like I said, there's their National History Day. Oh, and they have an Instagram too. So, Amanda, could you also share maybe one of your kind of favorite projects that you've seen over the years? I know it's hard to choose a favorite. It's like choosing a favorite child. But you mentioned one the other day that I thought was really neat.
So one of my favorites was from this past year. It was a student who he won the senior individual performance category. And I believe his performance is posted on our website and on that project examples page. He did his project on James K. Polk. And all of us, we know this family, and he'd won the junior performance, and we heard what his project was, and all of us thought, that's an interesting topic choice, James K. Polk. And I left that room, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, James K. Polk is a fantastic president, and why don't more people know more about him? So the topics that these students come up with, they get so passionate about it, and they learn so many new things, and in turn teach us so many new things about history, which is one of my favorite parts of NHD.
Oh, very cool. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us. Thank you, Tess, for joining us too. Tess has become kind of an expert at crafting these Learning Lab collections, pulling resources from a variety of different museums and disciplines to create some interesting content for students to kind of build their projects off of too. So thank you, Tess, for doing that. Again, just wanted to remind folks, that September 7th is the day that we're asking folks to publish collections by. If you don't make that deadline, it's not the end of the world. Do shoot us an email, though, to let us know that you'll be publishing collections later, and that way we can make sure that they're featured as well. With that, Tess, is there any last minute items you want to share?
No, I think you covered everything.
Excellent. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciated you all being here, joining us, talking about the Learning Lab as a means to share primary and secondary sources with students who are creating National History Day projects. And we look forward to seeing what you create. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.